Hello, and welcome to Macabre Histories. Before we journey back to the fog-shrouded hollows of 1901, I'd like to remind you that your support is what keeps these old tales alive. If you enjoy delving into the forgotten corners of history and horror, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. It truly helps us bring more of these narratives out of the shadows and into the light. Now settle in, dim the lights, and let us travel to a time and place where the mountains themselves kept secrets. The year is 1901. The Gilded Age is roaring in cities like New York and Boston. But out here, in the vast ancient folds of the Blue Ridge Mountains, time moves at a different pace. It seeps thick and slow, like molasses in winter. This is a land of shadow and stone, of whispers and wood smoke. And it is here that our story begins, with a man who believed that all the world's mysteries could be cataloged, indexed, and explained away. His name was Elias Thorne. Elias was a man of Boston, a man of brick sidewalks, gaslight, and rigorous academia. He was a folklorist by trade, employed by a prestigious university that was, at the turn of the century, fascinated with the preservation of American character. This meant sending young, earnest men like Elias into the remote territories to capture the songs, stories, and superstitions of the mountain folk before the telegraph and the railroad scrubbed them clean. Elias arrived in Asheville by steam train, a city that felt like a precarious outpost on the edge of a vast green ocean. But Asheville was not his destination. Hollow's End was. The carriage ride from the main road into the valley known as Hollow's End was a descent into isolation. The driver, a terse man named Silas, had barely spoken 2 words since they'd left the relative civilization of the county seat. The road, little more than a muddy rut carved between towering oaks and poplars, seemed to swallow them. The air, thick with the smell of damp earth, pine, and something vaguely sour, grew cooler with every mile. Elias, accustomed to the crisp, coal-scented air of Boston, found himself pulling his wool coat tighter. The mountains, which had seemed majestic from the train window, now felt oppressive. They loomed on all sides, a wall of green and gray that seemed to lean inward, blotting out the late afternoon sun. Not many flatlanders come this way. Silas grunted, his voice startling Elias from his reverie. He navigated the horses around a fallen log, especially not this close to planting season. "I'm a researcher," Elias explained, holding onto the bouncing carriage seat. "From a university up north. I'm here to study the local ballads and legends." Silas spat a brown stream of tobacco juice onto the road. "Legends." He shook his head slowly. "Ain't nothing in Hollow's End you'll want to study, mister. Nothing you'll want to take back with you anyway. Folks here, we keep to ourselves. We got our own ways." "I assure you, I mean no disrespect," Elias said, adjusting his spectacles. "I'm simply here to listen. To preserve." Some things," Silas said, his voice dropping to a low murmur that was almost lost beneath the creak of the wheels, "are best left unpreserved. Some things are best left buried deep." Elias noted the phrase in his leather-bound journal, "buried deep." It was a common trope in folklore. But as the carriage rounded a final bend, the valley of Hollow's End opened before them, and Elias felt a genuine, unacademic chill. It was not a valley, but a cleft in the earth. The hamlet itself consisted of perhaps a dozen cabins and a single, stark white church, all clustered near a creek that ran sluggishly through the center. The surrounding slopes were pocked with dark, shadowed openings, old mines, he presumed. But the most unsettling part was the silence. There were no children playing, no dogs barking, no sound of axes or laughter. The only sign of life was the thin tendrils of smoke rising from a few chimneys, disappearing into the heavy gray sky. "The Blevins boarding house is yonder," Silas said, pointing with his whip to a larger 2-story structure that sagged slightly to the left. "Reckon they'll have a room. Don't go wandering after dusk, Mr. Thorne. The paths ain't safe." "Wild animals, you mean?" Silas paused, pulling the horses to a stop. He turned and looked at Elias, his eyes pale and serious. "No, sir, not animals, just the paths. They ain't safe." Elias Thorne stepped down from the carriage, his city boots sinking into the mud. He paid Silas, who seemed eager to leave, turning the horses around almost before Elias had his valise in hand. As the carriage rattled away, The silence of Hollow's End descended like a shroud. He stood alone in the center of the hamlet, a man of science in a place that felt profoundly, primordially unwell. A curtain twitched in the window of the general store, but no one emerged. He was being watched. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and walked toward the boarding house, the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressing against his back. The Blevins boarding house smelled of boiled cabbage, damp wool, and something acrid, like burnt chicory. Mrs. Blevins, a woman built like a stack of flour sacks, with hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her skin, greeted him with profound suspicion. "A room?" she repeated, wiping her hands on her apron. "We ain't had a boarder in, well, a long time. Not since the troubles started again." "Troubles?" Elias asked, setting his valise down on the worn floorboards. He was trying to be genial, to present himself as harmless. "A sickness, is it?" Mrs. Blevins's eyes darted toward the window, as if the very word sickness might invite it in. "Some call it that. It's a blight. On the land, on the folk. Started about 2 months back. The corn's coming up rotten. The well water's taken on a taste. And folks are getting peaky. Peaky. Worn, thin," she said impatiently. "Their minds go cloudy. They start seeing things that ain't there, hearing things." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's her." "Her?" "The old woman up on the ridge. Eliza Vance, the witch of Blue Ridge County." She breathed the name like a curse. "She's always been there, up on that mountain, same as her mother and her grandmother before her. But they kept their distance. Now she's soured the land. She's called something up, Mr. Thorne, something unholy." Elias's academic interest was piqued, overriding his unease. This was it, the core of the local superstition. "A witch? Mrs. Blevins in 1901, surely you don't." "You ain't from here, sir," she cut him off, her face hardening. "You ain't seen what we've seen. You ain't lived under her shadow. Reverend Blackwood, he knows. He's been preaching against her. He says she's consorting with the old powers, the ones that lived in these mountains before man." She showed him to a room on the 2nd floor. It was small, cold, and meticulously clean, with a single iron bedstead and a wash basin. From his window, he could see the entirety of Hollow's End. And beyond it, rising high above the other peaks, was the ridge Mrs. Blevins had spoken of. It was darker than the others, thick with pine and shadow, and Elias fancied he could see a single, thin wisp of smoke rising from its crest, the cabin of Eliza Vance. He spent the next 2 days attempting to engage the townsfolk. It was like trying to catch mercury with his bare hands. He went to the general store, run by a man named Hatcher, who counted out Elias's coins for kerosene and hardtack as if they were contaminated. When Elias asked about local songs, Hatcher pretended not to hear him. He approached a group of men sitting on the porch of the store, whittling. They simply stopped their carving and stared at him, their expressions flat and hostile, until he nervously tipped his hat and walked away. These were a people under siege, not by an army, but by fear. They moved with a hunched, hurried gait, constantly looking over their shoulders. They spoke in low voices, and any conversation ceased the moment Elias drew near. He was the flatlander, the city man, an unwelcome variable in their equation of terror. The only person who would speak to him at length was Reverend Blackwood, and that was only because the Reverend saw Elias as a soul to be saved, or at least a witness to be convinced. Blackwood was a tall, gaunt man with a face like a hatchet and eyes that burned with a chilling fervor. He found Elias in the boarding house parlor, reading by the low light of an oil lamp. "Mr. Thorne," the preacher said, his voice a sonorous boom that filled the small room. "Mrs. Blevins tells me you are a man of books, a man of logic." "I try to be, Reverend," Elias replied, closing his journal. "Then you must understand that there are 2 logics in this world," Blackwood said, taking the seat opposite him. "There is the logic of man, which is small and vain, and there is the logic of God. And here, in these mountains, there is a third, older logic. The logic of the stone, and the shadow, and the deep places. You're speaking of the witch, Eliza Vance." Blackwood's face darkened. "She is no mere woman, sir. She is a vessel, a channel for the wickedness that this valley was built upon. The old settlers, they knew of it. The Cherokee who came before them, they knew of it. They knew not to dig too deep, not to stir the slumbering things. He leaned forward, his eyes fixing Elias in their intense gaze. This blight is not of the soil, it is of the soul. She has made a bargain, Mr. Thorne. She has offered this valley in exchange for, well, only the devil knows what. Reverend, with respect, Elias countered. I have studied these beliefs. Often these witches are simply women who understand herbology. Midwives, healers. Healers? Blackwood scoffed. Tell that to Jebediah Stowe. His boy, young Thomas, just vanished. Walked out of his own yard 2 weeks ago. Hasn't been seen since. Tell that to the earth, which gives us black, twisted roots instead of corn. Tell that to the men who hear whispers from the old mine shafts. No, Mr. Thorne, this is a spiritual rot, and it all comes from that ridge. Elias was a skeptic. He believed in poverty, fungal infections, and mass hysteria. What he was seeing in Hollow's End was a community strangling itself with its own fear. But as he sat there, listening to the preacher's dire warnings, a low tremor ran through the house. So subtle he almost missed it. The glass in the window pane vibrated with a low humming sound. What was that? Elias asked. Reverend Blackwood smiled, a cold, thin expression. The mountain. It's restless. She's stirring it. That night, Elias slept poorly. He dreamed of vast, dark spaces underground, of roots coiling like serpents, and of a woman's voice humming a tune that was old before the trees were. Elias Thorne was not a man to be deterred by superstition. He was, at his core, an empiricist. He believed in observation. The next morning, he resolved to investigate the blight himself. He left the boarding house with his satchel, his journal, and a canvas bag for collecting specimens. He told Mrs. Blevins he was going botanizing on the lower slopes, carefully avoiding any mention of the ridge. He walked east toward the creek that bisected the valley. The water itself was the first sign. It should have been clear, cold mountain runoff. Instead, it was sluggish and carried a faint, milky turbidity. When he knelt by the bank, he caught the scent he'd noticed on the ride in, a sour, metallic odor, like spoiled eggs and rust. He dipped a finger in. The water felt strangely slick, almost oily. He followed the creek toward the fields where the hamlet grew its corn and squash. What he saw was distressing. The corn stalks, which should have been reaching for the sky in the early summer, were stunted, yellow and twisted. He pulled one from the earth. The roots were not healthy and white. They were a dark, sickly gray, covered in small, pulsing nodules that looked like insect galls. But when he sliced one open, it wasn't a grub inside. It was just a thick, blackish fluid that smelled strongly of that same sulfuric taint. He walked further, into the woods that bordered the fields. The silence was profound. There were no birds, no squirrels chattering in the high branches. The very air felt heavy, muffled, as if a great weight were pressing down on the forest. He noticed the trees themselves. The oaks and hickories were losing their leaves, despite the season. The bark was peeling away in damp patches, revealing a pale, gelatinous fungus underneath. It was this fungus that captured his attention. It grew in wide, pale patches, almost invisible against the bark. But as he leaned closer, he saw that it was faintly phosphorescent, even in the daylight. It gave off a weak, sickly glow, like a dying ember. He touched the tip of his pencil to it, and the fungus retracted, shrinking away from the contact with a speed that was deeply unnatural. Elias, though unnerved, meticulously scraped a sample into a glass jar, sealing it tightly. This, he thought, was the culprit, a new, aggressive armillaria or some other blight. It was likely infecting the water table, poisoning the crops, and its spores, perhaps, were hallucinogenic, causing the cloudy minds Mrs. Blevins described. It was a solid, scientific theory. He pressed on, climbing the slope, drawn by a morbid curiosity. The higher he climbed, the more pervasive the silence became. The trees were thicker here, the canopy blotting out the sky. He found himself walking on a thick carpet of moss that seemed to drink the sound of his footsteps. It was in a small clearing that he found the second piece of evidence. It was a deer, or what was left of it. The creature lay on its side, its form oddly preserved. There were no signs of a predator, no marks of claws or of teeth. It had simply stopped. Its eyes were wide open, milky and vacant. But the truly awful part was the change. From the deer's body, the same pale phosphorescent fungus was growing in great, blossoming clusters. It had consumed the creature from within, using it as fuel. And as Elias watched, he saw a patch of the fungus on its flank swell and burst, releasing a fine, shimmering cloud of spores into the still air. Elias clamped a handkerchief over his nose and mouth, backing away quickly. He stumbled over a rock, catching himself on a poplar tree. His hand brushed against the trunk, and he felt that same slick, gelatinous texture. He was surrounded by it. He suddenly realized the path had disappeared. The moss-covered ground looked the same in every direction. The trees, all draped in the same pale lichen, offered no bearings. A thread of genuine panic, cold and sharp, pierced his academic calm. He was lost. He turned, trying to retrace his steps, but every direction looked identical. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. He began to walk, faster now, his heart hammering against his ribs. The air seemed to be getting thicker, and the sour metallic smell was stronger. He felt a wave of dizziness, and the trees seemed to sway, their branches bending like grasping arms. He was breathing in the spores. He knew it. "Get hold of yourself, Thorn," he thought, forcing himself to stop. He leaned against a rock, closing his eyes, trying to clear his head. He had to think logically. He was on a slope. Down was the valley. He just had to find the direction of the incline. He opened his eyes, scanning the forest floor. And that's when he heard it. It wasn't the preacher's whispers. It was a sound. A low, resonant thrumming, like a colossal engine idling deep within the earth. It was a vibration he felt more in his bones than in his ears. It was coming from beneath his feet. He forgot his scientific detachment. He ran. He scrambled downhill, crashing through underbrush, slipping on the slick moss, gasping for air that felt too thin to breathe. He ran until he burst from the tree line, tumbling onto the muddy bank of the tainted creek, back within sight of the stark white steeple of Reverend Blackwood's church. He lay there for a long time, his chest heaving. He had his sample. He had his proof. But he also had a new, terrifying data point. The sound. The deep, resonant pulse of the mountain itself. His tidy theory of a simple fungus began to feel woefully, terrifyingly inadequate. The blight was real, but it was coming from somewhere he couldn't explain. The following day was Sunday. The church bell in Hollow's End did not ring with a clear, joyous peal. It tolled with a dull, heavy clank, a sound that seemed to be absorbed by the oppressive gray sky. Elias, feeling a compulsive need to understand the social mechanics of the town's fear, decided to attend the service. His encounter in the woods had shaken him. He needed to see how the community leader, Reverend Blackwood, was handling the crisis. The church was packed. Every resident of the hamlet was there, crowded onto the hard wooden pews. They sat stiffly, their faces pale and gaunt. The peakiness Mrs. Blevins had described was visible on every one of them. Their eyes were shadowed, their hands clasped so tightly in their laps that their knuckles were white. The air inside was close, smelling of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and the ever-present sour taint that seemed to have permeated the very wood of the building. Elias took a seat in the back row, his presence noted with a collective silent turn of heads before they all faced forward again. Reverend Blackwood stood at the pulpit, a gaunt, imposing figure in stark black. He did not open a Bible. He did not speak of gospels or parables. He gripped the sides of the pulpit and stared out at his congregation, his burning eyes seeming to pin each person to their seat. "The plague is upon us," his voice began. Not a shout, but a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated with conviction. "You feel it. You feel it in your bones. You taste it in your water. You see it in the soil that rejects your seed." A low murmur of "Amen" and "I" swept the room. You ask, "Why, Lord? Why have you forsaken us?" You weep. You pray. But you do not act. He slammed his fist on the pulpit, making the dust jump. God has not forsaken this valley. This valley has forsaken God. You have allowed wickedness to take root. You have allowed the serpent to coil on our very doorstep." He pointed a long, trembling finger toward the window, which faced the dark ridge. "She is up there, the crone on the mountain, the vessel of the abomination. Eliza Vance. She who consorts with the shadows. She who turns her back on salvation and embraces the old dark ways that thrive in the deep earth." A woman in the front row let out a low, terrified sob. "The blight is her work," Blackwood declared. "The sickness is her summons. The whispers you hear from the old mines, that is the voice of her master, calling from the blackness beneath our feet. She has fed it. She has nourished it with her heresy. And now it wakes." Elias felt a cold dread settle over him. The preacher was not just channeling their fear. He was sculpting it, giving it a name and a face. He was turning mass hysteria into a weapon. "I spoke to Jedediah Stowe," the preacher continued, his voice dropping to a dramatic, chilling whisper. "The night before his boy, Thomas, vanished. Jedediah told me he saw her. He saw Eliza Vance walking the edge of his property, sprinkling a dark powder on the ground. He said she was singing to the earth, and the next morning, his son was gone. Taken. A tithe," the congregation gasped. This was new, volatile information. Elias wondered if it was true, or if the grieving, paranoid Jebediah had merely thought he'd seen her. In this valley, it barely mattered. "We have tolerated the snake in our garden for too long," Blackwood roared. "We have prayed for deliverance, but faith without works is nothing. We have turned the other cheek so long our necks have broken. The time for prayer is over. The time for action is at hand. The good book tells us, 'Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live.'" A profound, dangerous silence filled the church. The air was electric. Elias could feel the shift. The fear, which had been passive and defeated, was now coalescing. It was becoming anger. It was becoming righteous, terrible intent. "We must cleanse this valley," Blackwood cried, his arms raised high. "We must go to the root. We must cut out the canker. We must climb that ridge and confront the evil in its lair. We must cast down the idolater and tear down her profane temple. We must show the darkness that this valley belongs to the Lord." A man stood up. Elias recognized him as Hatcher, the storekeeper. She's got powers, Reverend. What can we do against that?" Blackwood's eyes blazed. "What power can stand against the righteous arm of God? She is but one woman, steeped in filth and heresy. We are many. We are the faithful. We will go as an army of the Lord, protected by his shield. We will bring holy water to banish and the axe to cleanse. We will burn her cabin to the ground and salt the earth where it stood." A raw, ragged cheer rose from the pews. Men were standing, their faces grim, their eyes lit with the preacher's fire. The women watched, their expressions a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Elias Thorne sat frozen in the back pew. This was no longer a matter of folklore. He was witnessing the birth of a mob. The scientific detachment he clung to was useless here. These people weren't going to wait for his fungus samples to be analyzed in Boston. They were going to climb that mountain. They were going to confront the witch. And Elias had a terrible sinking feeling that whatever they found up there, it would not be a simple old woman with a knowledge of herbs. The preacher was right about one thing. They were stirring something up. But it wasn't Eliza Vance. It was the valley itself. Elias left the church before the service was even finished, slipping out the back door as the congregation began to sing a militant, grim hymn. The fervor in that small building was suffocating. He needed air. He needed facts. The preacher's accusations about Jebediah Stowe and his vanished son, Thomas, felt like a catalyst. The town was a powder keg, and Blackwood had just lit the fuse. Elias knew he couldn't stop the mob, not with his Flatlander logic. But perhaps he could find something to redirect them. If this blight had happened before, as Mrs. Blevins had hinted, started again, there might be a record of it. A record that didn't point to a witch, but to a natural phenomenon. He made a decision. He walked directly to the boarding house, grabbed his satchel, and went to the stable. He paid an exorbitant sum to the Blevins' sullen stable hand to rent a horse, a sway-backed mare with a wary eye. He had to ride back to the county seat, to the courthouse. He had to see the archives. The ride out of Hollow's End was just as oppressive as the ride in, but now Elias was fueled by a new urgency. The thrumming he had felt in the woods, the pale fungus, the preacher's words. It was all swirling into a dreadful tapestry. The county courthouse was a small, dusty building of brick and timber, smelling of old paper, floor wax, and mice. The archivist, a Mr. Peabody, was an elderly man with a green eyeshade and ink stains on his cuffs. He was profoundly uninterested in Elias's request. "Hollow's End?" Peabody wheezed, adjusting his shade. "Not much from there. Folks in that valley, they don't write things down. They endure." "I'm looking for anything," Elias pressed, sliding a silver dollar across the desk, a significant bribe. "Geological surveys, town records, personal diaries, anything from, say, 1840 to 1860. I'm looking for reports of crop failures, sickness, or unusual events." The dollar vanished. Peabody grunted. "Could look. Most of the old family parcels are in the back." He left Elias in a cramped, cold room filled with towering shelves of ledgers and boxes. The dust was thick, and the only light came from a single fly-specked window. Elias spent hours, his hands growing numb and black with grime. He found shipping manifests, tax records, and deeds, but nothing about the land itself. He was about to give up when he found it, stuffed in a box labeled Miscellaneous Donations. It wasn't an official ledger. It was a personal journal, its leather cover warped and stiff. The name on the inside cover was written in faded iron gall ink. Silas Croft, 1853. Elias sat on a stool and carefully opened the brittle pages. Croft had been a prospector, one of the first settlers in Hollow's End, drawn by rumors of iron and coal. Most of the entries were mundane. Dug 10 feet, struck granite, traded corn with the Cherokee. Then, the tone changed. October 14th, 1853. The air is wrong, a sourness to it. The Cherokee will not come near the valley. Their shaman, he who watches, warned us to leave. Said we were waking the deep sleeper. Foolishness. It is only autumn sickness. Elias's blood ran cold. He read on, his pulse quickening. October 29th, 1853. The blight is on us. The crops are rotted in the ground. The creek water is unpotable. It runs white like a sick man's discharge. Men are ill. They complain of the shakes and bad dreams. They say the ground hums. I feel it too. At night, a vibration, like a great heart beating in the rock. November 5th, 1853. Jedediah's brother, Ezra, went mad. He walked into the woods claiming the rock was singing to him. We never found him. The others, they are turning on the Vance woman. She is the granddaughter of the first settler, claims the valley as her birthright. She lives up on the ridge as her people always have. They say she knows the old ways. They say she brought this on us. Elias was reading a script from nearly 50 years prior. The same families, the same ridge, the same witch. November 10th, 1853. We opened the new shaft. The Black Rattle Mine. We were looking for coal. We found something else. We broke through into a cavern. Not a cavern of stone. It was soft, lined with a pale glowing moss, like the rot on the trees. The air that came out. God forgive us. The smell. The men who were at the front. They dropped. Their minds just snuffed out. November 11th, 1853. We sealed the mine, collapsed the entrance with blasting powder. The Vance woman came down, not to curse us, but to help. She brought salts and herbs. She said we had broken the skin of the earth and let the sickness out. She said her family had been keepers, watching the deep places. She performed a ritual, a binding she called it, chanting in the old tongue, Scots Gaelic, I think. She said it was a poultice for the land. December 1st, 1853. The humming has stopped. The air is clear. The blight is receding. But the valley is diminished. Half of us are gone. We are a hollow people now. I see why the Cherokee called this place the Valley of the Tainted Sleep. We have buried our mistake. We sealed the Black Rattle Mine. God willing, no one will ever open it again. Elias sat back, the journal in his lap. His hands were shaking. This was it, the proof. Eliza Vance wasn't the source of the evil. She was the remedy. Her ancestors were keepers. The witch was a guardian, protecting the valley from a geological or perhaps biological horror trapped beneath it. The blight wasn't her curse. It was a symptom that the seal was weakening. The Black Rattle Mine. Reverend Blackwood had spoken of whispers from the old mine shafts. Elias slammed the book shut. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone where the preacher would lead his mob. They weren't just going to confront an old woman. They were going to the source. And in their righteous fury, they were liable to cleanse the very thing that was holding the horror at bay. He had to get back. He had to get to the ridge. He had to find Eliza Vance before Blackwood and his mob did. He ran from the archives, leaving Mr. Peabody asleep at his desk, and spurred his tired horse back toward the darkening, dreadful valley of Hollow's End. Elias rode the poor mare harder than he should have. The sun was a low, bloody smear in the west by the time he reached the outskirts of Hollow's End. He bypassed the hamlet entirely, guiding the horse onto a narrow game trail that he prayed led up the main ridge. The town below was ominously quiet. He saw no lights in the windows of the boarding house or the general store. The only illumination came from the church and from a cluster of torches near the edge of the woods. The mob was gathering. He was running out of time. The ascent was brutal. The trail was steep, littered with loose shale that slid under the horse's hooves. The air grew perceptibly colder, the scent of pine sharp and clean, mercifully free of the valley's sour taint. But the silence up here was different. It was an ancient, watchful quiet. The trees, massive old-growth hemlocks and pines, stood like sentinels. After an hour of climbing, the horse refused to go further, rearing and snorting at the encroaching darkness. Elias dismounted, tethering the horse to a low branch. He would have to go the rest of the way on foot. He pushed through thickets of mountain laurel, his clothes catching on thorns. The thrumming he had felt in the woods was absent here, but he could feel the tension in the air, like the stillness before a lightning strike. He finally crested the ridge and found himself in a small clearing. The cabin was there. It was not the dilapidated, evil hovel he had imagined. It was small, sturdy, and impeccably kept, built of thick-cut logs and stones chinked with clay. A well-tended garden, surprisingly green and vibrant, grew on its south side. This was not a blighted place. This was a sanctuary. A thin plume of hickory smoke rose from the stone chimney. A woman stood on the porch, her back to him, scattering corn for a few chickens. She was not a crone. She was tall, straight-backed, and wore a simple dress of homespun wool. Her hair, though streaked with gray, was long and braided. "You're the Flatlander," she said, without turning around. Her voice was clear and strong, with the distinct Appalachian cadence, but lacking the fear he heard in the valley. "You make a lot of noise in the woods. You'll scare off anything worth seeing." "Mrs. Vance? Eliza Vance?" Elias said, breathless, stepping into the clearing. She turned slowly. Her face was weathered by the sun and wind, lined with years, but her eyes were a startling clear blue. They were eyes that looked at things and saw them. She held a small woven basket. "I am. And you are Mr. Thorne, the folklorist. Come to write down our quaint ways before they're gone." Yes. But I'm here about what's happening in the valley. The blight, the sickness, the preacher, Reverend Blackwood. He's blaming you." Eliza Vance nodded, a shadow passing over her features. "Blackwood? Aye. He's a man who needs a devil, so he's made one of me. He's a fool. He thinks the world is a storybook of good and evil. He doesn't understand balance." "I found a journal," Elias said, pulling the stiff, leather-bound book from his satchel. "Silas Croft, 1853. He wrote about the Black Rattle Mine. He wrote about your family. He called them keepers." Eliza's composure broke for a fraction of a second. Her eyes widened and she stared at the book in his hand as if it were a ghost. "He wrote it down? Tarnation? Some things shouldn't be written. They should be known. He wrote that your grandmother, I presume, she stopped the blight. She sealed the mine. Is it true?" Eliza turned from him, looking out over the valley below, which was now a pool of darkness. true. Her voice was heavy. The folks in the valley, they're like children playing on a frozen pond. They don't think about the cold, dark water underneath. My people, my mother and her mother, we've been watching the ice, patching the thin spots. The fungus, Elias said, piecing it together. The thrumming sound. What is it? It ain't a what, she said, her voice dropping low. It's an it. It's the mountain's heart, the deep earth. It's not evil, Mr. Thorne. It's just is, like fire is or the river in a flood. It's life, but it's not our life. It's old, and it's hungry, and it sleeps. But the mining, the digging, they scratched at its skin. And then came the drought this spring, the water table's low. The seals my grandmother put in place, they're drying out. The sickness is seeping through the cracks. The fungus you saw, that's just what it breathes. It's the land's fever. The preacher, he's coming for you, Elias said urgently. He's gathered the town. I saw torches. They're coming to cleanse the mountain. Eliza closed her eyes, her hand gripping the porch rail. Fools, blundering, terrified fools. They're not coming for me, Mr. Thorne. Not really. Blackwood's been reading the same old books I have. He knows the legends. He's not coming to me. He's going to the mine. He thinks he can cast out the devil with his prayers and his fire. What will happen? What do you think happens when you throw a torch into a gas-filled room? She said, turning to face him, her blue eyes flashing with a cold fire. He's not just a fool. He's a danger. He's going to the Black Rattle mine, and he's going to blast it wide open. He's going to undo the work of generations. He's going to let it out. Suddenly, from far below, a sound echoed up the ridge. It was the sound of men shouting, angry and unified. The torchlight Elias had seen was moving. It was ascending the lower slopes. They're coming, Elias whispered. Aye, Eliza said, walking past him into her cabin. And we've got to get to the mine before they do. You wanted to study folklore, Mr. Thorne? Well, you're about to see a legend with its teeth bared. She emerged a moment later with a heavy canvas sack slung over her shoulder and a lantern in her hand. Don't just stand there, city man. If you're coming, come. The mob was not moving quickly. They were a disorganized cluster of righteous fury, slowed by the steep terrain, their courage bolstered only by the preacher's rhetoric and the corn liquor passed between them. This gave Elias and Eliza a crucial, if slim, advantage. Eliza moved through the woods with a speed and silence that astonished Elias. She followed no path he could see, navigating the treacherous, moonless forest by some internal compass. He, in contrast, stumbled, snagged his coat, and sent cascades of small stones rattling down the slope behind them. Quieter, she hissed, pausing to listen. The shouting from below was clearer now, punctuated by the occasional crack of a hunting rifle being fired into the air. They're on the old logging trail. It'll take them to the west face. But the Black Rattle, it's on the north. They traversed the ridge for another 20 minutes, moving parallel to the crest. The air up here was thin and cold, but Elias could feel a change. The ground beneath his feet was beginning to hum. It was the same low, subsonic vibration he had felt in the blighted woods, but amplified, clearer. It was, as Silas Croft had written, like the beating of a colossal heart. We're close, Eliza said, her voice tight. Feel it? The thrumming? Aye, it's waking. All that noise and anger, it's like shouting at a sleeping bear. They came to a sheer rock face, a place where the mountain had been carved away. A curtain of ivy hung over a dark opening, not much taller than a man. The Black Rattle, Eliza said, pulling the ivy aside. The entrance was not the collapsed pit Croft's journal had described. The 1853 settlers had sealed it, but someone had been here since. The timbers that had been blasted shut were now pulled apart, forming a narrow, dark passage. Who did this? Elias asked, his voice hushed. Desperate men, Eliza said grimly. Folks looking for coal, for silver. The curious, the foolish. The seal's been weak for years, but they never got far. She lit her lantern, the flame casting flickering, monstrous shadows. The air, it keeps them out. But Blackwood, he'll bring his faith, and that's a different kind of armor. It'll let him get just far enough to do the worst kind of harm. She stepped inside. Elias, after a moment's hesitation, followed her. The air was immediately, shockingly different. It was cold, but not the crisp cold of the mountain night. It was a damp, subterranean chill that seemed to cling to his skin. And the smell, that awful, sulfuric, coppery smell, was thick, almost suffocating. "Cover your mouth," Eliza advised, tying a handkerchief over her own. Elias did the same. The mine shaft sloped steeply downward. The walls were slick with the same pale phosphorescent fungus he'd found on the deer. Here, deep in the absolute dark, its glow was no longer faint. It pulsed with a soft, sickly green light, bright enough that they barely needed the lantern. The fungus grew in great fleshy sheets, and Elias could see it moving, swelling and shrinking in time with the low thrumming that was now all-encompassing. The thrumming was not just a sound, it was a presence. Elias felt it inside his skull, a pressure that made his vision swim and his thoughts feel slow and sticky. This is what's making them peaky," he managed to say, his voice muffled. "The air, the spores." "Partly," Eliza said, her voice strained. She was walking carefully, her hand on the damp rock wall. "It's not just the air, it's the sound, the deep song. It unknits you, Mr. Thorne. It finds the little dark corners in your mind and pulls them apart." They walked deeper, and the mine shaft began to change. The man-made timbers and pickaxe marks gave way to a natural cavern. The walls widened, and the sickly green light grew brighter. They were in a vast, echoing chamber, and they were not alone. "Sweet Lord," Elias breathed. In the center of the cavern sat Jebediah Stowe, the farmer who Blackwood had claimed was grieving his taken son. He was not grieving. He was working. He was on his knees, his hands raw and bare, digging at the cavern floor. He was surrounded by piles of the glowing fungus, which he seemed to be packing into the earth. He was humming, a low, tuneless, dreadful sound that matched the thrumming of the mountain. "Jebediah!" Elias called out, taking a step forward. "No!" Eliza grabbed his arm, pulling him back into the shadows. "Don't! He's not there!" Jebediah turned. His face was caked in grime and the pale fungus. His eyes were wide, vacant and milky. He was smiling a terrible, ecstatic smile. "He's coming," the farmer whispered, his voice a dry rustle. "The boy's gone to open the door. And I am setting the table. The sleep is over. The feast begins." His son, Elias realized with dawning horror. Thomas, he wasn't taken. He came here. Jebediah followed him. "It calls to the weak," Eliza said, her voice full of sorrow. "To the grieving, the lost, the angry. It promises them peace. It promises them what they lost." Jebediah turned back to his digging. Soon, the skin will break. The air will be sweet again, sweet and new." "He's digging at the seal," Eliza whispered, her face pale in the green light. "He's been weakening it from this side, and Blackwood is coming to break it from the outside." As if summoned by her words, a new sound echoed from the tunnel they had just left, the distant, angry shouting of the mob. They had found the mine entrance. This chapter of the story, as outlined in the initial plan, involves Elias bringing supplies to Eliza as a token of truce to gain information. However, the narrative has organically progressed past this point. Elias and Eliza have already met, forged an urgent alliance based on the shared threat, and are currently in the Black Rattle mine, with the mob approaching. The original Chapter 8 moment, Elias showing her the journal, already happened and served as the truce. Therefore, I will merge the intent of this chapter, building the alliance under pressure, with the current action of the story, creating a new, intense chapter that fits the timeline. The truce is no longer about a trade of goods. It's about a trade of knowledge in the face of immediate peril. The shouts from the tunnel grew louder, echoing horribly in the phosphorescent chamber. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of metal on stone. The mob was in the mine. "Jebediah!" Eliza shouted, her voice cutting through the thrumming. "Get away from that! You don't know what you're doing!" The farmer didn't even look up. He continued his rapturous, awful work, his hands moving rhythmically, packing the glowing fungus into crevices in the rock. "They're coming, Eliza. What do we do?" Elias felt a wave of profound vertigo. The air was so thick with spores his head was spinning. The pressure in his skull was immense. Eliza grabbed his shoulders, her grip like iron. "Mr. Thorne, Elias, look at me." He forced his swimming vision to focus on her clear blue eyes. "You are a man of books, a man of mind. That is your strength. The deep song. It feeds on fear. It feeds on rage, on grief. Look at Jebediah. He's full of grief. Look at the mob. They're full of rage. It's drinking them. You must hold your mind. Be the folklorist. Be the scientist. Observe. Do not feel. Can you do that?" I think so," he stammered, the thrumming trying to pull his thoughts apart. "Good." She released him and strode past the entranced farmer, ignoring him as if he were a piece of furniture. She went to the far wall of the cavern, where the green light was brightest. The wall was not solid rock. It was a massive, crystalline formation, like quartz, but it was moving. It was pulsing slowly, in time with the thrum, and behind it, Elias could see a vast, dark space. "This is the skin," Eliza said, placing her hand flat against it. It was the 1853 seal, crystallized over time. Or what's left of it. Croft's blasting powder and my grandmother's binding. It held for a long time, but it's thin. So thin. "What's in the sack?" Elias asked, desperate for a plan. "The journal said your grandmother used a poultice, salts and herbs." "Aye," Eliza said, opening her heavy canvas bag. She pulled out several smaller pouches. "But this isn't a poultice. This is a fight." She dumped the contents on a flat rock. Elias, forcing his scientific mind to the forefront, observed. There was a large bag of coarse rock salt, another of what looked like iron filings. A third held a silvery metallic powder. "Iron," Eliza explained, "for the earth, salt for the spirit, or the infection, whatever you want to call it. And this," she held up the silvery powder, "is magnesium. My grandmother learned that from a traveling chemist. She said if the binding failed, the next keeper would need fire and light." "You're going to, what, blast them?" Elias asked, confused. "No, not them. The deep song. It hates this. It hates pure things. It hates salt, iron, sharp light. It's a thing of rot, of the dark, of the slow, fungal change. It can't stand the quick." She began rapidly mixing the powders in a dry basin. "The mob. Blackwood. They're bringing torches. They're bringing fire." "Eliza, you said that was dangerous. You said torch in a gas-filled room." "It is," she said, her face grim, her hands moving with practiced speed. "But it's the only chance we have. Blackwood thinks he's bringing the fire of God. He's just bringing the spark. I'm going to give it the fuel. We can't reseal the mine, not like this, not with it awake. But we can cauterize it. We can burn the fungus back. We can create a flash so bright and a heat so clean it scours this chamber and forces the it back to sleep. A false dawn, my mother called it." The shouting was perilously close now. Elias could see the first flicker of torchlight in the tunnel entrance. "Eliza," Elias said, his voice trembling, "Jebediah is still here. And the mob, they're townsfolk. They don't know." Eliza Vance stopped mixing. She looked at Elias, her face a mask of terrible ancient weariness. "This is the burden of the keeper, Mr. Thorne. Sometimes to save the valley you can't save the people. Jebediah is gone. His mind is given over. And the mob, they've made their choice. They chose rage. They chose the preacher's fire. There has to be another way." "There isn't," she snapped. "This is the old logic Blackwood was talking about. It's not kind. It's not good. It's just necessary. Now take this bag." She thrust a pouch of the salt and iron mixture into his hands. "When they breach the cavern, when their torches are in the room, throw this. Throw it at the fungus on the walls. It'll cling. Then I will light the magnesium." "Eliza, this is insane." "Welcome to the Appalachians, Mr. Thorne," she said, her hands full of the silvery powder. "Now get back. And hold your mind. The first of the mob spilled into the cavern. It was Hatcher, the storekeeper, and two other men Elias didn't know. Their faces were slick with sweat, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fervor. They held torches high, and their gazes fell upon the sight before them. They saw the vast, glowing green cavern. They saw Jebediah Stowe, kneeling like a pagan priest, murmuring to the earth. And they saw Eliza Vance, the witch, standing before a pulsing wall of light, her hands full of glittering dust. And then, at the mouth of the tunnel, Reverend Blackwood appeared. His gaunt face was triumphant. "Behold," he roared, pointing at Eliza, "the harlot, in her unholy temple, the beast is revealed. Behold the fool!" Eliza Vance's voice rang out, sharp and clear, cutting through the preacher's declamation. She stood tall, the green light of the fungus painting her in spectral colors. "Behold the man who brings fire to the powder keg." Reverend Blackwood strode into the center of the cavern, his eyes burning with fanaticism. The thrumming in the chamber was overwhelming, a physical weight. Elias could see the men in the mob swaying, their hands to their temples. The spores and the deep song were working on them. "Heretic!" Blackwood shouted, raising a large, crude wooden cross. "This is a house of darkness. We have come to cleanse it, to cast you out." "This is not my house, preacher," Eliza cried, her voice desperate. "This is a wound, and my family has been tending it for 100 years. This is the Black Rattle Mine. Does that name mean nothing to you?" "It is a pit of evil," Hatcher the storekeeper yelled, his voice cracking. "Jebediah, what's she done to you, man?" Jebediah Stowe turned his milky, vacant eyes toward the mob. He smiled. "He's coming," he whispered. "He's coming home." And he returned to his digging, his hands moving faster. "Listen to me," Elias shouted, stepping forward. He held up Silas Croft's journal. "This is a record from 1853, the last time this happened. It's not her, it's the mine. Your ancestors, they knew. They sealed this place. Eliza's grandmother saved them." Blackwood laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "A trick, a devil's book. Do not listen to the Flatlander, men. He is bewitched. She has poisoned his mind." "She's right, Reverend," one of the younger men in the back cried out, his face pale. "My grandpappy, he told stories. He said, 'Never dig on the North Ridge, never wake the sleep.' This is what he meant." "That is old wives' tales," Blackwood roared. "Idolatry. The word of God is the only truth, and the Lord commands us to smite the wicked." Crack. A sound like a cannon shot echoed through the chamber. It didn't come from the mob. It came from the pulsing crystalline wall behind Eliza. A long, dark fissure spiderwebbed across its surface. Jebediah Stowe gave a sigh of pure ecstasy. "He's here." The thrumming stopped, and in its place came a new sound. A wet, sloughing, sliding sound, and a pressure. An immense, psychic pressure that brought Elias to his knees. It felt like a giant hand was squeezing his brain. The men in the mob cried out, dropping their torches. The light in the cavern flickered, and the phosphorescent fungus began to pulse with a violent, blood-red light. "You've done it, Blackwood!" Eliza screamed, her voice strained with effort. She was standing her ground, though her body trembled. "You and your rage! You've broken the seal!" From the fissure in the wall, a thick, black, oily substance began to seep. It wasn't liquid, it was composed. It was a mass of fine, writhing filaments, like the roots Elias had seen on the corn, but moving with a collective, sentient purpose. It crept onto the cavern floor, and the stone hissed and steamed where it touched. It was not a monster. It was a force. It was the blight itself, the raw, ancient, hungry consciousness of the deep earth. Reverend Blackwood, for the first time, looked truly afraid. His triumph vanished, replaced by a stark, primal terror. What is this?" "This is it," Eliza yelled. "The deep sleeper, the legend you thought was a story. This is what's been poisoning your water. This is what's been taking your minds. And you just knocked on its door and invited it in for supper." The mass of dark filaments sensed the new arrivals. It paused, then surged toward the nearest warm thing, Jebediah Stowe. The farmer did not scream. He opened his arms, his face alight with joy. "Yes," he breathed. "Take me. Make me new." The filaments enveloped him. He was covered in an instant, and his body went rigid, then began to change. His form contorted, his limbs lengthening, his skin taking on the pale fungal texture of the walls. He was being remade. The mob broke. The sight was too much. The men screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. They turned to flee, scrambling over each other, dropping their torches, which sputtered on the damp floor. "No!" Blackwood yelled, holding his cross aloft. "Stand! Stand and fight!" The creeping horror ignored him. It was moving toward the largest source of food, the bottleneck tunnel where the mob was trying to escape. "Now, Elias!" Eliza shrieked. Elias, shaking off the psychic pressure, ripped the pouch of iron and salt from his belt. "Hatcher! Preacher, the torches!" Hatcher, in his panic, had dropped his torch right at the edge of the creeping mass. It was the only one still lit. "Eliza, it's too close! Throw it!" Elias threw the bag. It burst open in midair, showering the dark, filamentous mass and the nearby fungus-covered walls with the mixture of salt and iron. The creature, the it, recoiled. It let out a soundless psychic shriek that made Elias's nose bleed. The salt and iron sizzled on its substance, burning it like acid. The red light from the fungus flickered wildly. "The light, Eliza!" Elias yelled, stumbling back. "It's working!" "Not enough," she yelled. "It's too big! Blackwood, your torch! Throw it on the wall where the powder is!" Reverend Blackwood was paralyzed, staring at the writhing thing. His faith was shattered. There was nothing in his Bible for this. I do it!" Eliza screamed. She was standing by the crystalline wall, her hands full of the silvery magnesium powder, which she was stuffing into the great fissure. The dark mass was recovering. It was surging again, ignoring the salt, heading for the tunnel. Blackwood, with a final desperate cry, part prayer, part curse, did as she said. He hurled his blazing torch. It spun end over end and struck the wall, right where Elias's mixture of salt and iron clung to the thick, pulsing fungus. The effect was instantaneous. The torch hit the wall. The salt and iron-dusted fungus did not just burn, it detonated. It flared with a brilliant, roaring white light, 1,000 times brighter than the green glow. The resinous, spore-filled air ignited in a chain reaction, a wave of clean, white flame that washed over the ceiling of the cavern. The dark, creeping it was seared. It pulled back with that same mind-tearing psychic scream, retreating from the sudden searing light. "Eliza!" Elias yelled, shielding his eyes. "Now!" she screamed back. As the creature recoiled toward the fissure, Eliza advanced through her hands, full of the silvery magnesium, directly into the new crack in the crystalline wall. The magnesium, an accelerant of impossible potency, hit the superheated rock and the retreating filaments. The world vanished in white. It was not a sound. It was an absence of sound. It was a light so pure and so total that Elias was struck blind. He was thrown backward by a concussive wave of heat and force, striking his head on the tunnel wall. The last thing he heard before his senses fled was not the roar of an explosion, but the high, thin, singing note of the crystalline seal fusing. The heat was a physical blow. The light was a hammer. And then, silence. A profound, absolute silence. The thrumming was gone. The screaming was gone. The sliding, slithering sound was gone. Elias awoke. How much later, he couldn't know. Minutes? An hour? He was lying in the tunnel, 20 feet from the chamber. His eyes ached. His vision was a mass of swimming purple spots. The air smelled sharp and clean, like a blacksmith's forge after a lightning strike. The suffocating, sour, fungal smell was gone. He crawled, his limbs aching, back toward the cavern. It was dark. The phosphorescent fungus was gone, burned away. The walls were black, scorched and smooth. His lantern was smashed, but he had matches. He struck one. The chamber was unrecognizable. The walls were vitrified, melted into a black, glassy slag. The floor was covered in a fine white ash. Of the dark, filamentous it, there was nothing. Of Jebediah Stowe, There was only a scorched outline on the floor, an atomic shadow of his ecstatic final moment. Of Reverend Blackwood and the mob, there was no sign. Elias prayed they had fled in time. He looked toward the crystalline wall. The fissure was gone. In its place, the magnesium and the heat had melted the crystal, which had re-solidified, sealing the crack with a smooth, glassy scar. The false dawn had worked. It had cauterized the wound. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He saw her. She was slumped against the far wall, not far from the new seal. She was breathing. Her hair was singed, her face and arms covered in soot, but she was alive. Elias rushed to her, helping her sit up. "Eliza, are you all right?" She coughed, a dry, racking sound. She looked at the sealed wall, then at the scorched chamber. "It's quiet," she whispered. "The deep song. It's asleep, truly asleep." "You did it," Elias said, his voice full of awe. "You saved them." "We did," she corrected, gripping his arm. "The scientist and the witch." She looked at the ashen floor. "The cost, it's always so high." "Blackwood, the others, they ran," she said. "I saw them. They fled when the first fire hit. Blackwood, he ran fastest of all. They'll be halfway to the county seat by now. They'll never speak of this. They'll say the witch chased them with fire, or they'll say nothing at all. They'll just leave." They heard a groan from the tunnel entrance. It was Hatcher, the storekeeper. He was alive, his clothes smoking, his face blackened, but alive. He looked into the cavern, his eyes wide with a new, profound, and wordless terror. He looked at Eliza, not with hate, but with a kind of primal awe. Then, without a word, he scrambled back up the tunnel and into the night. "Come," Eliza said, getting to her feet, wincing. "Let's get out of this tomb. I need the sky." Elias helped her, and together they limped out of the black rattle mine, leaving the clean, sterile darkness and the new forged seal behind them. They emerged onto the ridge. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky in pale shades of pink and gold. The air was cold, crisp, and clean. The nightmare was over. The climb down the mountain was a slow, painful ordeal, a stark contrast to their frantic ascent. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving Elias and Eliza with a bone-deep weariness and the dull ache of their numerous bruises. They emerged from the mine into the pre-dawn light, a world washed in shades of gray and indigo. The air, for the first time since Elias had arrived, felt truly clean. The sour, metallic taint was gone, scoured from the atmosphere by the intense, purifying heat of the false dawn. They did not speak for a long time. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on the shale and the first, hesitant chirping of a chickadee, a sound Elias hadn't heard in days. The forest seemed to be breathing a sigh of relief. "He'll be back," Elias said finally, breaking the silence as they navigated a steep switchback. Eliza paused, leaning on a poplar sapling. "Who? Blackwood?" "No, I mean, the deep sleeper. The seal is new, but it's still there. It's still alive, isn't it?" Eliza nodded, her gaze distant, fixed on the valley below as it slowly emerged from the mist. "It's not alive like we are. It is. It's part of the mountain. We haven't banished it. We just gave it a stomach ache, made it go back to bed. The seal will hold. For a time. For how long? My grandmother's held for near 50 years. This one," she flexed her soot-covered hands, "this one was more violent. Maybe it'll hold longer. Maybe not. But it'll hold for my lifetime. And that's all a keeper can ever hope for. Will you stay?" Elias asked. "After this? Hatcher saw you. He'll tell them. Blackwood will tell them. They'll still blame you." Eliza gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Let them. Blackwood has lost his power. He showed them fear. He showed them his faith was lacking. He roared about a devil, but when he saw it, he ran like a scalded cat. Hatcher will say nothing. He'll board up his store and be gone by week's end. I saw it in his eyes. He's a man who has seen the plumbing of the world, and he wants no part of it. The rest, they'll forget." How can they forget this? They'll have to, she said simply. The mind is a funny thing, Mr. Thorne. It can't hold on to a horror this big. It's too heavy. They'll tell themselves it was a bad dream, a gas in the mine, a mass hysteria. They'll invent a story. They'll say I set a trap. They'll say Blackwood drove me out. They'll find a story that lets them sleep, and in a year the corn will grow right, and the water will be sweet, and they'll believe their new story more than they ever believed the truth. They reached the lower slopes, where Elias had tethered his horse. The poor animal was still there, looking spooked but unharmed. Eliza went to it, stroking its muzzle, her hands, which had wielded the elements of the earth, now gentle and calming. You should go, Mr. Thorne, she said, not looking at him. Your work here is done. I can't just leave you. You can, and you must. You're the Flatlander, the outsider. You're part of the bad dream they need to forget. If you stay, you're a reminder. You're a witness, and they can't abide a witness. She turned to face him, her clear blue eyes holding his. Go back to Boston. Write in your books. Write about our quaint songs and superstitions. But you leave this part out. You leave us out. Some things are best left buried deep. She was echoing the words of Silas, the carriage driver. Elias looked at the woman before him, a woman who had faced an ancient elemental terror, who had lost her home and been branded a monster, all to protect the very people who despised her. She was the bravest person he had ever met. The journal, he said, holding out Silas Croft's book. It's yours. It's your family's history. She looked at it, then pushed his hand away gently. No, you keep it. You're the folklorist. You're the man of books. You're the new keeper, in a way. You keep the story. Just keep it safe. Don't let the fools get it. He nodded, unable to speak. He put the journal back in his satchel. Go on now, she said, turning her back to him and walking toward her ridge. The sun's coming up. I've got a garden to tend. Elias Thorne watched her walk away until she was swallowed by the pines. He mounted his horse and rode, not toward Hollow's End, but south, toward the main road, leaving the valley, the mine, and the Witch of Blue Ridge County behind him. Elias did not ride directly to the county seat. A morbid academic curiosity, or perhaps a need for closure, compelled him to see Hollow's End one last time. He skirted the edge of the woods, approaching the hamlet from the west, the rising sun at his back. He had expected to find the town in an uproar. He expected to see the mob, returned and defeated, gathered in the street. He expected wailing, or anger, or accusations. He found only silence, a silence more profound and unsettling than the one that had first greeted him. He rode his horse down the center of the muddy track. The hamlet was deserted. Doors were open. A few chickens pecked in the dirt, but there were no people. He dismounted in front of the general store. The door was ajar, the closed sign swinging crookedly. He peered inside. It was empty. Hatcher's whittling chair on the porch overturned. He walked to the Blevins' boarding house. His valise was sitting on the porch, packed and waiting. Mrs. Blevins was nowhere to be seen. The house was quiet. Then he saw the church. The doors were wide open, and Elias walked toward it, his footsteps echoing in the empty street. He stepped inside. Reverend Blackwood was there. He was not at the pulpit. He was sitting in the front pew, his back to the door. He was small. The fire and brimstone were gone, leaving only a collapsed, hollowed-out man. He was staring at the simple wooden cross on the altar. "They're all gone, Mr. Thorne," Blackwood said, his voice a dry, empty husk. He didn't turn around. I saw you, on the ridge, with her." "They've left?" Elias asked, standing in the aisle. When we came running back, the light, the heat, it broke them. It broke me. I told them the witch had opened a door to, I don't know what I told them. But they didn't wait to find out. They took their wagons, their mules. They took what they could carry. They're gone. Fled. All of them. Hatcher, the Blevins, even the men who weren't in the mine. The fear was, it was a final plague. "And you?" Elias asked. You stayed. Blackwood was quiet for a long time. He ran a trembling hand over his face. How can I leave? I am the shepherd, and I led my flock into the mouth of the wolf. I led them there with pride, with vanity, with my terrible blind faith. He finally turned, and Elias was startled. The preacher's burning eyes were dull. The man looked 20 years older. You were the skeptic, the city man, and you knew. She knew. I just read a book, Elias said softly. She saved us, didn't she? Blackwood whispered. That thing, that horror. She fought it. The light, it wasn't her evil. It was the cleansing. Yes, Elias said. She saved the valley. Blackwood let out a sound, a terrible shuddering sob that was torn from his very soul. He slumped forward, his head in his hands, and wept. He wept for his lost flock, for his broken faith, and for the sin he had committed, not against God, but against the woman who had been guarding them all along. Elias stood there for a long moment, a witness to the unmaking of a man. He saw no triumph in it, only tragedy. He quietly backed out of the church, leaving the preacher to his empty pews and his new, terrifying understanding. He retrieved his valise from the porch, mounted his horse, and rode out of Hollow's End, a hamlet that had died not from a blight, but from its own fear. The train ride back to Boston was a jarring transition. The world outside the train window seemed impossibly bright, loud, and normal. People in the dining car laughed, smoked cigars, and discussed politics. President Roosevelt's new policies, the price of steel. Elias sat in his private compartment, the curtains drawn, Silas Croft's journal clutched in his satchel. He felt displaced. He was a man out of time, haunted by a memory that had no place in this sane, rational, electrified world. The thrumming of the train's wheels on the track was a pale, pathetic echo of the deep song. The smell of coal smoke and city air was a relief, but it felt thin, unreal. When he returned to his university, he was greeted as a returning adventurer. His colleagues in the folklore department gathered to hear his tales. He gave them what they wanted. He spoke of the quaint Appalachian dialect. He played for them a few murder ballads he'd overheard in the county seat. He described their superstitions about haints and grinding, and the mountain code. He presented his samples of the fungus, the sample he'd taken from the blighted wood. It was, of course, inert. The false dawn in the mine, the cleansing of the chamber, had apparently neutralized the entire organism. The blight was gone. His botany professor dismissed it as a common, if aggressive, slime mold, likely Fuligo septica, its phosphorescence a curious but explainable anomaly. Elias wrote his paper. It was titled, Superstition and Hysteria in Isolated Appalachian Communities, a Case Study of Hollow's End. He wrote about Reverend Blackwood, though he changed the name. He described how a charismatic leader, preying on the fears of a community suffering from a crop failure, the slime mold, and a likely outbreak of ergot poisoning from rye bread, causing the hallucinations, had manufactured a witch hunt. He explained in cool, academic prose the mechanics of mass hysteria. His paper was brilliant. It was lauded for its clarity, its scientific detachment, and its sympathetic but firm debunking of the supernatural. It secured his tenure. Elias Thorne became a very respected, very successful, and very haunted man. He never returned to the Blue Ridge Mountains. He kept Silas Croft's journal locked in a private safe in his study. Sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet and the gaslights were low, he would take it out. He would run his fingers over the brittle pages and read about the deep sleeper and the keepers. He had done as Eliza asked. He had kept the story safe. He had lied. But the deep song, once heard, is not easily forgotten. 2 years later, in 1903, Professor Elias Thorne took a leave of absence from his university. His colleagues were told it was for nervous exhaustion. He had, they whispered, been working too hard. He committed himself to the McLean Sanitarium, a quiet, leafy campus outside of Boston. He had not gone mad. He was not peaky, but he had developed a condition. He could not stand silence. He could not be in a room without a clock ticking, a fire crackling, or a window open to the street. because in the perfect, absolute quiet, he could still feel it. A low, subsonic vibration in his bones. The thrumming. He told the doctors he was suffering from tinnitus. They nodded and prescribed rest. He spent his days in the sanitarium's library, reading geology texts. He read about deep earth strata, about seismic activity, about the strange, newly discovered world of fungal networks that spanned entire forests. He searched desperately for a rational, scientific container large enough to hold the truth of what he had seen in the Black Rattle Mine. He never found one. He was a man of science, a man of logic, and he was, for the rest of his life, the last keeper of the Black Rattle Mine, watching the ice from 1,000 miles away, praying it would hold. Years passed. Elias Thorne recovered. He left the sanitarium, returned to his university, and became a legend in his own right. The stoic, brilliant professor of American folklore. He never married. He lived alone with his books and his secrets. The Great War came and went, sweeping away the last vestiges of the 19th century. The world became faster, louder, and more terrible than anything the deep sleeper could have imagined. Hollow's End remained a ghost town, a footnote on a county map. The forest reclaimed it. The cabins rotted and fell. The church steeple collapsed. Nature, as it always does, erased the scar. Eliza Vance's name was never spoken again. Elias sometimes wondered what became of her. Did she live out her days on that ridge? Did she tend her garden, alone, listening to the mountain? He hoped she had found peace. He believed in his heart that she had died in her own bed, the last of her line, her duty done. Then, in 1927, Elias, now a gray-haired, distinguished man, received a letter. It had no return address. It had been mailed from a small town in Tennessee on the other side of the Blue Ridge. The envelope contained only a small pressed flower, a Galax urceolata, a plant that grows only in the high altitudes of the southern Appalachians, and a single newspaper clipping. The clipping was small, from a local paper. The headline read, "Geological Survey Team Reports Strange Magnetic Anomalies and Tremors Near Old Blue Ridge County Mines." The article described how a team, searching for new coal seams, had been surveying the area around what was once Hollow's End. Their compasses had spun wildly. Their sensitive equipment had picked up a low rhythmic subterranean tremor that they could not explain. They had also found traces of a peculiar unidentified fungus. The team's leader, a man from a northern university, had dismissed it as a natural if curious phenomenon and had ordered the exploration to cease, citing unstable geology. Elias Thorne read the clipping. His hand, steady for 26 years, began to shake. He looked at the pressed Galax flower, a symbol of the mountains, a message from who? A descendant? A fellow traveler? Or just a coincidence? It didn't matter. He knew what it meant. The seal was holding, but beneath it, after a long, quiet sleep, the heart was beginning to beat again. The deep song was returning. Elias Thorne walked to his fireplace. He looked at the newspaper clipping and at the brittle, faded journal of Silas Croft. He had been the keeper of the story, but the story was not over. It was perhaps just beginning again. He took the journal and the clipping, and he fed them one by one into the fire. He watched the truth turn to ash. He had been a folklorist. He had been a witness. But he would not be an oracle. He would not be the man who led the next generation of fools back to the Black Rattle Mine. He would do what Eliza Vance had done. He would keep the secret. He would let the mountain keep its own. He sat in his chair, the fire warming his old bones, and listened to the civilized, comforting sound of the clock ticking on his mantel. And he forced himself, as he had for a quarter of a century, to ignore the faint, familiar vibration he felt rising, even now, from the deep, dark, patient earth beneath his feet. Our story of 1901 must, like all things, come to an end. But the mountains endure. The Blue Ridge remains, a vast, green, silent witness to the small, frantic lives that play out in its shadows. Hollow's End is gone. If you were to hike those remote ridges today, you would find no trace of it. You might find a collapsed chimney stack, a pile of stones covered in moss, or a rusted barrel hoop. You would assume it was just another failed homestead. Another testament to the hardship of mountain life. You would never know the truth. The Black Rattle Mine is also gone, its entrance long since buried by a century of rock slides and leaf litter. There is no marker, no warning. The forest has kept its secret well. The fate of Reverend Blackwood is unknown. He vanished from the county records, a shepherd who had lost his flock and his God in the same terrible night. The other residents of Hollow's End scattered, absorbed into other towns, other valleys, taking their fragmented nightmarish memories with them, burying them under new lives. Elias Thorne passed away in 1934. His colleagues remembered him as a brilliant, if eccentric, scholar. His professional papers were archived by his university. His personal effects, including a locked safe for which he left no key, were disposed of. And Eliza Vance, she remains where she always was. She is no longer a person, but a story. She is the Witch of Blue Ridge County. She is a name whispered by new generations, a local haint story told around campfires. She is a myth, and like all myths, she is more real than the history that bore her. She is the guardian, the outcast, the protector. She is the spirit of the ridge itself, a reminder that the world is older, deeper, and far more strange than our modern minds like to believe. The horror of 1901 was buried, but the Appalachians are deep, and the earth has a very, very long memory. The deep sleeper, the ancient fungal heart of the mountain, is still there. It is not evil, it is just waiting. It dreams its slow geological dreams under the crystal seal, under the tons of rock, under the quiet green forest. It is waiting for the sound of a pickaxe. It is waiting for the curious. It is waiting for the next generation of fools who, in their pride, forget the oldest rule of the mountains. Some things are best left buried,